It's new material now that's just coming out, however, this year in 2014 that we need to look at. Dr. Dan Brubaker just finished his thesis, his PhD, 2 months ago. And for the last 2 years, he has been going around the world looking at all the earliest manuscripts, and he looked at the 10 of the earliest manuscripts, and he did his research just on these 10 manuscripts. His research is going to be published next year. Intentional Changes in the Quran is the title of his research. You notice intentional changes. And what he has done, he has looked and he has gone to every one of the manuscripts and of the ones I've just referred to, and he's looked for these intentional changes, and he's found 6 different kinds of changes. He's found tapings, where they've put tapings over certain words, blocking it out. Patches that appear to be serving some other purpose than to repair the page itself, centering part of the text. He has found hundreds and hundreds of insertions. Here are some of the examples. I don't have enough, I could go up, because he's now found 800 of these corrections in these manuscripts, where you find an insertion, a post-production addition to the text, adding it to that which was originally there. He also found erasers, where they have actually erased part of the text, intentional removal of the text from the page. Hundreds he has found of these in the earliest manuscripts. Erasers with overwritten. They have erased it and then they wrote over top of it. Here are some examples here. These are all available. You can get them. I can give them to you if you want them. Overwriting without apparent erasers. They just overwrote with not even trying to erase it, just over top of the text that was already there. Hundreds that he has found. Selective coverings. Covering as a category of intentional change directly over the portions of the text. Selective coverings that are then overwritten. These are fascinating. These he's found tens and tens of them. He was expecting maybe to find 1 or 2 or 3. He found over 800, and those are just the ones he's published in his thesis. He's going to go back and find even more. These are interesting because this is not only they have covered it over, they've then written over top. We would like to take off the covering and see what is it they've censored. Because obviously these manuscripts, the earliest manuscripts, were not the same or are not the same as the Quran that we have today. Here's a case where there are multiple changes in just one page. Erasers, overwrittens, corrections. So what are his conclusions? When you look at the manuscripts between the 8th and 9th century, you can see, Dr. Brubaker says, that there's a movement of the Quran towards a standardized text that continues right up until the 9th century, right up until the 800s. Muhammad died in 632. So this continues for almost 200 years. Ooh. The canon, he suggests, is not 656 or Uthman's time. He suggests it's closer to the 9th century. The 800 changes, he found there were corrections removing or adding the long vowel, corrections by the original scribe. Corrections demonstrate movement towards a standard. There were corrections sometimes targeted or selected to try to conform to the 1924 text, stylistic conformity to the page and the standard without any aesthetic concerns. And it goes on and on and on. I'm not going to go through the whole list of what he has done. You will be able to read it next year. Therefore, agreeing with Oltekulich, who says there is not one companion codice that he has reached us without corrections, nor is there one manuscript that is even near perfect match to the reported reading of any one of the companions. There can now be no doubt that all the extant manuscripts of the Quran have undergone some alteration, and that simple standardization of orthography or the technology of written Arabic is insufficient to explain every instance of this alteration. The material evidence in the form of manuscript presentations present, according to Brubaker, challenges to the traditional narrative, suggesting a process of standardization of written Qurans took place over a much longer period of time, and not just 18 years. When you look at the Arabic script itself, and when you look at that, you need to ask, could this Arabic script, would this Arabic script have accommodated the Quran that we have today? And the answer is absolutely no. The Arabic script in the 7th century was so incomplete and so defective, it is known today as a scriptio defecta. You cannot read the Quran using the 7th century Arabic script. Dorosh looks at it and he says, take a look at just one letter, the smiley face. Just look at the smiley face. That could be 5 different letters. Later on, they had to put dots above or below it to show you could distinguish which the letters were. If you put 1 dot above it, it's a na. If you put 2 dots, it's a ta. 3 dots, it's a tha. 1 dot below it, it's a ba. 2 dots, it's a ya, na, ta, tha, ba, ya. 5 different letters for just one smiley face. Can you see the problem of the early Arabic text? It could not have accommodated the Quran. The Quran could not have been written in that text. And the question I would ask is, if God really wanted to reveal himself to mankind, why in the world did he use a language that could not have accommodated his revelation? Why did he use Arabic? Since Arabic, it took them 200 years, finally, to get the accommodation so we could read the Quran as we do today. 200 years it took them to finally get the diacritical marks and the vowelization, the dhamma, the kasra, the fatta, for those of you who know Arabic. Why didn't God just use Hebrew? See, Hebrew had not only its consonantal text, but its vowelization by the 2nd century BC in place. Or Greek, that we have our New Testament. It had both the consonant and the vowelization. They've been around since the very beginning, since the time of 2,000 years ago, the very beginning of the New Testament writings. Why didn't God continue in the very same scripts that man had already been using to write down his revelation? Interesting, isn't it? Or could this have been written by men? That's what I'm coming back to. Could this all have written nothing more than an exercise by men? And then, of course, according to Muslims today, this is the standard. This is the standard, 1924. This was the only standard that was chosen by what I would call theologians, Al-Azhar University. But it had to be given its rule of approval, and that was not done until 1985, less than 29 years ago, by the Ibn Saud family, a political standardization. There are no originals of the Quran. As much as Shabir would like to continue to say that they do exist, please don't say it in public anymore. No one's going to believe you. Because all the original manuscripts that you have claimed, and others, I'm not just blaming you, but everybody has claimed, the Topkapi, the Samarkand, the Ma'il, the Petropolitan, all of these are 8th or 9th century. Suffice it to say, there are some that have suggested that maybe part of the Sana could be from the 7th century, and those two scholars, Guderzi, you know what I'm talking about, Sadeghi, and Guderzi and Bergman, they suggest that carbon dating has now put them back to the 7th century. The problem is, difficult with carbon dating is you can't even know, it's very ineffective, and it only tells you when the animal was killed. It doesn't tell you when the writing took place. Make sure you get that correct. But even that, 90% of it is dated to the late 7th century, the time of Abdul Malik. And I would suggest, and I am saying that, and I'll go out on record here, that the Quran that probably began with a man named Abdul Malik. That's who I'm going to suggest began the Quran. And that from the time of Abdul Malik, especially his son, Al-Walid, who ruled from 705 to 750, it then proliferated, and that's why we're seeing all these manuscripts. And you have different schools that were vying for ascendancy, and that's why you're finding a standardization taking place. But it didn't happen with Uthman. It probably happened with Al-Walid, Mujahid, that's true, Muqla. It happened much, much later. And then finally was honed down to the Quran that we have today in 1924. Made official in 1985. Thank goodness we don't have that problem with the New Testament.